Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today with CureDuchenne and NS Pharma. We'll be discussing VILTEPSO, an FDA-approved treatment for patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy amenable to exon 53 skipping. A little housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available for you to view on the CureDuchenne website about 24 hours after the conclusion of this program. We ask that you use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen to submit questions throughout the webinar. And you don't have to, we'll answer them at the end, but you don't have to wait to the end to ask them. Ask them when you're fresh in your mind. You can use that tool all throughout the presentation, and then we'll jump in about the last 15 minutes to answer those questions for you live. And then if you have additional inquiries, if a question pops into your head right after we end the webinar, please do reach out to cares@cureduchenne.org, and we'll make sure to get that question answered for you. And of course, I have to plug our upcoming conference, April 20th through 23rd in San Diego. Can't believe it's coming up so soon. I know a ton of families are registered, but there is still time. We actually extended our early bird pricing for about another week. So this would be the week to register if you haven't already. We're so looking forward to the conference and can't wait to see you there. And we also have different events all throughout the United States this year. Some have already passed, but most haven't. So please do check out cureduchenne.org/events, and hopefully we're coming to your city or a city near you soon with either a dinner session for families or a workshop. Awesome. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to hear a few words from Gardner. Thanks, Gardner, for being here. We're going to talk about the new 4-year data on VILTEPSO presented by Dr. Thangarajh, who will be welcomed up next for the presentation. We'll hear a little bit more about NS support and how to get in touch with NS Pharma, and then we'll jump into that live Q&A. So Gardner, please take it away. Glad to have you here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie, and thank you all for joining. I'm pleased to sort of head off this important presentation of long-term data for VILTEPSO. Here at NS Pharma, we take great pride. We are a highly focused, research-driven biopharmaceutical company that's focused on delivering new therapies to rare disease, and really Duchenne in particular. We take a patient-centric approach to this. And we have several potential candidates coming up in the future. We currently have VILTEPSO for 53 amendable. We'll be soon launching the Capricor 1002 product within Duchenne. And then we have additional programs in exon 44, 50, 51, 45, and 55. I love these programs, and thank you, Dr. Thangarajh, and I look forward to a great presentation. So thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Thangarajh, we'll welcome you for the presentation. Excellent. So if you could go ahead and introduce yourself to the attendees on the webinar, and just let me know when to change to the next slide. I'll turn my camera off and you'll take it away. But thank you for being here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to see everyone via Zoom. This is becoming the new norm. My name is Mathula Thangarajh. I am a child neurologist and neuromuscular physician. I really appreciate what Gardner had said. Throughout my practice, I think the focus is really to be patient-centered, and this is what I try to value every day during my research and during clinical care. So I'm very excited that my vision and mission is in alignment with what NS Pharma is doing, and thank you to CureDuchenne for hosting this. Today, I'm going to be presenting about VILTEPSO. It's an FDA-approved treatment for patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy amenable to exon 53 skipping. Next, please. So we're going to talk a little bit more about Duchenne muscular dystrophy itself, but what is VILTEPSO indicated for? So this is a medication that is approved for use for those who have mutations, which is amenable to exon 53 skipping. This approval was guided by FDA under accelerated approval, and this was based on specific metrics. One was the increase in dystrophin production in the skeletal muscle, and along with the improvement in functional outcomes. And the continued approval may be contingent upon verification and description of clinical benefit in a confirmatory trial. Next, please. So one of the most important questions that families would ask with any drug would be the safety profile. And in this case, with the VILTEPSO, as a class, it belongs to an exon skipping therapy. As a class of agents, exon skipping drugs have been known to have renal toxicity. This was clearly seen in preclinical studies. So we do recommend that anyone prior to starting this medication have a baseline kidney function test. So what are those measures and what do we do in clinic? One of the most important things that we measure is serum cystatin, and in urine, we do look at protein and protein to creatinine ratio. One of the questions that we always get asked is, why don't we measure serum creatinine, which is also in some way a muscle marker, and it has effects on the kidney as well. Because patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy tend to lose muscle mass, creatinine itself is not a very sensitive indicator. Therefore, the metrics that we used are serum cystatin C and then urine dipstick. So the way we do this in practice would be to have this done prior to the commencement of VILTEPSO, and then subsequently prior to each infusion of every 3 months. Well, some of the adverse reactions which has been reported in the clinical trial includes common upper respiratory infection, injection site reactions, and cough and pyrexia. So during this presentation, I'm going to talk about why do we advocate for early treatment and why is that important. And then we are going to go over the principles of exon skipping. And then really the highlight would be to present the data, especially the long-term data with VILTEPSO, and then also describe the safety and tolerability profile of this medication. Next, please. So many of you in the audience would have had a diagnosis of Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and we will go over this very briefly. So Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a very severe type of muscular dystrophy. It is caused by mutations in the dystrophin gene. And for those of you who are new to this, the way I tend to explain to families is really think of the gene itself as a cargo train. So you would have several carriages. And for some reason that we still don't understand, because the dystrophin gene is extremely large, it is more prone for mutations. So one of the things that would happen in this condition is that some of the carriages off of this cargo train, for some reason, would get disrupted. So the train itself is shorter, but if you can imagine that the engine is completely missing, then the train would not be able to advance. So we think of this similarly when we think of why this mutation really affects the protein. So there is the DNA which gets converted to pre-mRNA, and then the mRNA, which is kind of like the messenger, which then gets translated to protein, which is called the dystrophin protein. So in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, because of this mutation, this DNA does not get into this final product, which is the dystrophin product. Next, please. So, and I'm sure many in the audience can really relate to this story. We hear, although we know about the dystrophin and muscular dystrophy, we still have really many families would report that there is an odyssey when it comes to establishing the diagnosis. So right from infancy to early childhood, families would report that there are early motor milestone delays. So this has either been brought to them by attention, either by school or a caregiver, but really there is a lag from the time the diagnosis has been picked up from the family to a formal diagnosis of Duchenne muscular dystrophy is made, and this can be as long as 2 years in some cases. This condition is progressive, and the children do lose ambulation. This is usually in early teenage years. Unfortunately, there is still no cure for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, but the standard of care is really oral corticosteroids. And we now have very robust data to show that commencing steroids during a time window between ages 4 to 7 years in young boys really changes the natural history of the disease. In that the children are able to ambulate for a longer time. There is reduction in the severity of scoliosis. There is benefit both from cardiac and respiratory perspective. Like skeletal muscle, the heart is a muscle as well, and the recommendation in terms of standardized care is that cardioprotective agents be commenced at age 10 or slightly after. Next, please. So, for some reason that we still don't understand, age 7 seems to be the cutoff. And what do I mean by that? So although children really in infancy and early childhood would demonstrate motor milestone delay, during a period of between ages 3 to 6, they are undergoing skeletal maturity. So it's called a honeymoon phase. So parents might find that they are actually making lots of gains. But when it comes to age 7, then the decline becomes much more evident and more quickly. So this graph is really to depict that. So 6-minute walk test is one of the functional motor outcomes, very well standardized in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, but really came out of the literature from adult population where they were looking at lung function. The second metric that we commonly use in the clinic is called the NSSA, or North Star Ambulatory Time. And you can see here depicted in orange is boys who are less than 7 years of age, and then in green, older than 7 years of age. So over a 2-year period, so 0 to 24 months, you can see someone who's younger than 7 is stable or actually showing some slight gains in 6-minute walk test. But this is diametrically opposite as soon as the child turns 7 years of age. You can show that there is steep decline over time, very rapid over 1 year, and then from year 1 to 2, even more steeper decline. Also very true for North Star ambulation, steady when they are younger or a slight decline, but a steeper decline when they become age 7 or older. Next, please. So as Gardner mentioned, Duchenne is a very rare disease, and the FDA has really put a lot of thought about what is it that we need to do in terms of de-risking this when it comes to drug development. So we know that in order to preserve muscle, it is important to start corticosteroid treatment early. And that's usually between ages 4 to 7. And there are multiple studies which have really shown there is that there is robust benefit in commencing this. Next, please. So I'm going to go over a little bit about the theory behind exon skipping and why this is a very attractive option for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So when we look here, this is a cartoon presentation of what we call a soup alphabet. So everyone in every cell would have these genes which are aligned in kind of like a proper order. So you can imagine in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, there is a sequence that that's for some reason get disrupted. So this is healthy when there is a normal arrangement of alphabets. And again, we can go back to the analogy of the train or the cargo, where this is a train which has got the engine. So, you know, the engine is there. So when it runs, you have an in-frame and really good production of this dystrophin protein. In someone with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, for some reason, there would be this mutation, and really this pattern of arrangement of alphabets does not happen. So what does this mean? From what happens from the DNA to protein is that because of this disruption, really the protein is not produced. And when there is no dystrophin is produced, then the muscle becomes really fragile. So what does this medication do? And it's called exon skipping. What it does is that it really skips over the region where the mutation is located, and it would restore a sequence in which that soup alphabets can be restored. What this would mean is that there is a smaller amount of protein which is now being produced, but very important is that it would retain all of these essential functions, which means in the end we want this to make sure that in terms of function of the muscle itself, that it restores what dystrophin is supposed to do, which is really stabilize the muscle membrane. Theoretically, 90% of patients are amenable to some form of exon skipping therapy. And we know that there is, at least in literature, in the preclinical models, that multiple exons can be skipped very effectively. But with VILTEPSO, we are only going to be talking about exon 53 or exon 53 amenable skipping. Next, please. So with the VILTEPSO, its targets about close to 10% of Duchenne muscular dystrophy patients who have amenable to exon 53. And these are the list of exons or exon junctions that VILTEPSO will be able to target. So again, to go back, how does this medication act? It would skip over this region of exon 53 and then restore a reading frame. And what would this mean is that there would be dystrophin protein, which is now available for to the muscle fiber. The way we use this is once a week and comes at a dose of 80 milligrams per kilogram. Next, please. So how did we come about? So this was the phase 1 trial. This included a total of 16 boys between ages of 4 to 9 who received really 2 doses. So the lower dose, which was 40 milligram per kilogram, and then the higher dose, which was 80 milligram per kilogram. And then after a 4-week period, both got extended up to 20 weeks. Like all phase 1 studies, the primary outcome was to make sure that the medication is safe and tolerable. And then one of the most critical elements is to make sure that the medication is able to restore dystrophin, which is the protein that we are interested in. And the way we study this is using Western blot from muscle biopsy. The secondary outcome measures that this trial also investigated was to look at the dystrophin mRNA and protein assessment, but also several of the timed motor function test and the functional outcome measures, which is the 6-minute walk test. Next, please. So, so what this graph shows is that in both the cohorts which received the lower dose and the higher dose, the age was about 7 years, with younger kids around 4 and the older kids about 9.8. So what this trial included were all boys between ages 4 to less than 10. And then in terms of assessments, they had to walk independently and then be able to complete the timed motor function test, but also have a safety profile. So they did account for corticosteroid use for up to 3 months. And like I mentioned, we do now know that corticosteroids really changes the natural history of the disease. So a stable dose for up to 3 months was permitted. Next, please. To me, I think this is kind of like the most exciting part of the study. So we put a lot into safety and tolerability, yes, but we also want to know that this medication is efficacious. So what this really shows is that in terms of dystrophin restoration in muscle biopsy, you can see that these patients obviously will not have any dystrophin at baseline, but after treatment with VILTEPSO, they went from baseline of 0 to 0.6 to about 6%. So the way this was done was with the Western blot, and this shows very meaningful and robust increase in dystrophin production. Next, please. And this is the extension from the prior, which shows that every patient who received this drug showed a remarkable increase in dystrophin production. So why do we put so much emphasis on dystrophin? Both the FDA and in clinical practice, we know that the more the dystrophin, the better it is. And even small amounts of dystrophin really changes not just the muscle fragility, but also in terms of functional motor outcomes. So I think to me, the excitement comes from showing that this VILTEPSO is efficacious in restoring dystrophin expression in almost all, but in showing that 88% of these patients had dystrophin levels which were greater than 3%. Next, please. So again, this is to look under the muscle biopsy, and what we do find here is that prior to treatment, there is very little dystrophin. So this is the staining which comes right underneath. It's dystrophin is really located under the muscle membrane, and with VILTEPSO, you can see very nice, robust increase in dystrophin, and this is an overlay of with another protein called sarcoglycan. Next, please. So the secondary endpoints that this study examined was also to show how efficient is this medication in terms of skipping those mutated regions. And you can see that at baseline, the exon skipping efficiency was 0, but after treatment at week 25, this went up to 44%. Mass spectrometry is another way to look at amount of protein which was produced, and again here there was a robust increase from the 0.6 like we saw before to up to 4.2%, and then the previous slide which showed the immunofluorescence, again a very robust increase. And you can see in every measure, whether looking at efficiency and or the protein, all of them were statistically significant. Next, please. All right. So in the FDA guidance documents, the metrics are really, you could put them under 3 buckets. One is to demonstrate in a preclinical animal model showing that this drug is really doing what it's supposed to do. And the second one is dystrophin production. But when it comes to human clinical trials, one of the really an important measure that the FDA really wants to see is that the dystrophin protein which is restored is actually going to show a functional difference in terms of motor function in these patients. And this is what is depicted here. So time to run walk is another time to motor function test. And what this graph shows is that those boys in this trial who were treated with VILTEPSO showed a very remarkable increase in the time to run walk compared to those who did not. So the data which is shown here in gray is really the historical controls, and this comes from, again, a natural history study of someone who did not receive this medication, and shows that VILTEPSO is really able to make a difference in the functional outcome. Again, this is the graph on the right side is basically a depiction of this just given in terms of velocity. So you can see that someone who has not received this drug would be stable or show a very slight decline over a 24-week period, but someone who's received VILTEPSO shows a remarkable increase in the first 12 weeks and then a stabilization over the next 10 weeks. Next, please. So another metric that the trial examined was the time to stand. Again, what is shown here is someone who does not receive the drug would show a decline in the time to stand over time, whereas VILTEPSO shows stabilization or gain over time. Another function that the study examined was the 6-minute walk test. And like I mentioned earlier, over a 24-week period, someone who has not received this medication will show a decline, whereas those who had been treated with VILTEPSO showed stabilization or gain in this motor function test. Next, please. So another element that we always, that the family wants and we want to make sure is the safety profile, and listed here is the one in the those who received the higher dose, the 80 milligram per kilogram. Most of them reported upper respiratory infections or injection site reaction, but also a small amount had symptoms such as like cough or arthralgia, abdominal pain, or a rash. Next, please. One of the most important things I want to emphasize is that none of the children who received this drug had a serious adverse drug reaction or no death. Next, please. What had happened after the phase 1 was the phase 2 and open label extension, and we will go over this data. So after the week 25, there was the continuation of the phase 2 up to week 216 with the 18 milligram per kilogram. We will go over the data again. Next, please. So in the open label extension study, the primary outcome was to look at time to stand, and then the secondary outcomes again was other motor function tests. It include the time to run, the time to climb, and 2 of the motor studies, including the 6-minute walk test and then the NSSA. And throughout this period, the safety profile of VILTEPSO was assessed. Next, please. So in the open extension label study, where the primary outcome was the time to stand, again, going over this in terms of seconds, you can see someone who's never received a drug would show a decline over the 200 weeks, but somebody who had been on VILTEPSO was either showed stable effects for the first 100 weeks and then a decline. This is again the same graph, which is just depicted as function of velocity, so the speed. So someone who did not receive, so a historical control would decline over time, whereas somebody who received VILTEPSO showed stable and then a slight decline. Next, please. The other metric was the time to run, walk. Again, like previous, what here it shows is that someone who has never received the drug shows a steep decline over time, but someone who's received VILTEPSO is stable for the first 100 weeks and then a slight decline as well. Next, please. The other metric that was studied was the time to climb 4 stairs. And again, like the previous 2 studies, slides, what it shows is someone who's never received the drug, historically controlled, would show a decline over time, whereas those who have received the drug showed stable or a slower decline. So one thing I want to emphasize here is, like I mentioned, the FDA really made an emphasis when they came out with the document that with any investigational drug which is coming to market, they do want to make sure that the restored dystrophin is really making a difference in terms of functional outcomes. So with the extension data, what we are seeing is that it's just not one metric, but in several time function tests and in the functional outcome, there's really stabilization or improvement. So again, this is to emphasize that the dystrophin which is restored is really functional and making and really changing what is important in terms from a functional perspective. So with the open extension labeled, again, safety profile was evaluated and it really showed what the phase 1 trial had shown, just URI symptoms, pyrexia, nasal congestion, or mild headache. Next, please. In terms of side effects, none of the patients experienced any adverse serious drug event. 3 of them had reported, out of which 2 had a femur fracture or a lower limb fracture, and 1 patient had rhabdomyolysis. None of these serious adverse reactions was considered to be related to the study drug. Please. So VILTEPSO is indicated as an IV infusion, so this can either be done at home or in an ambulatory setting, and it's done over 60 minutes. So in practice, what we usually like to do is that the first or the second infusion takes place in the hospital, in the ambulatory setting, but eventually can be transitioned to the patient receiving this medication at home. Next, please. So in sum, what we presented was that VILTEPSO is indicated for those who are amenable to exon 53 skipping. 100% of the patients in the trial who received this showed an increase in dystrophin levels. One of the nicest things is that it's an extremely safe drug. Minor side effects include URI symptoms, this injection site reaction, and cough and pyrexia. It can either be done as given at home or in a treatment center. And the most exciting part was the 4-year functional data that was summarized. Next, please. I'm happy to take any questions about the data, and then over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Thangarajh. I think we're going to work through, have questions in a couple of minutes and take those. Hi, everyone. Thanks for sharing your day, your afternoon, if you're back here on the East Coast. My name is Jonathan Cabral. I'm the U.S. Head of Patient Services, and I have responsibility for what's called NS Support. And that is a support program that is designed for patients and their parents, the caregivers, physicians' offices, and really to provide personalized access and support, customized resources, looking at your benefits investigation. We look at what's called your pharmacy benefit, a medical benefit, home infusion benefit, as the doctor alluded to. If you have commercial insurance, we look at your what's called the copay assistance program. We certainly need to explore what the infusions options are. As Dr. Thangarajh alluded to, the vast majority these days are done at the home. We have some preferred partners in that regard. Not all, but the vast majority are done with home infusion. And then because it is a weekly infusion, it is ongoing support and working with you, with your doctor's office, the home infusion company, your insurance company, to provide continuity of care. I want to bring your attention to, you have my personal email, j.cabral@nspharma.com. You have my personal cell phone there. If I can be of any assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You're also, I would certainly encourage everybody to, if you have any questions, if you want to get something answered, please call that phone number 833-677-8778. Again, that's 833-677-8778. I want to turn it back over to Dr. Thangarajh and others with our medical affairs team that can answer any clinical questions And we will be at the Futures Conference, the CureDuchenne Futures Conference. We go to all the meetings put on by CureDuchenne, and certainly that's a big one in the second half of next month. So thank you for your time and have a great day.
Thanks so much. All right. I'm going to welcome Liana Orlando and Mike Kelly from the CureDuchenne research team to help me facilitate this Q&A. And I welcome everybody who is on the webinar right now to go ahead and use that Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen and insert some questions about the clinical data and the presentation or MS support.
Thanks, Carrie. Before we delve into the questions, I just want to, say that thank you so much for sharing the 4-year data. It's encouraging to see the continued slowing of the progression of the disease, and that's very promising for individuals. And so it's good to see that that the benefits are persisting. We have one question here about how this drug might work on someone who's a little bit older than sort of the target group, non-ambulatory, and are their kids taking, VILTEPSO who are in wheelchairs? So maybe we can address sort of broaden out the question in terms of individuals other than what was in the trial population.
So I would be happy to answer that, Liana. How are you? It's Leslie Magnus.
Good to see you.
Medical Affairs here at NS Pharma. So as we saw from the presentation just now, all the patients who were enrolled in our clinical trials to date were ambulatory. So it is difficult to speculate as to how a non-ambulatory patient would benefit from this drug. However, we are completing an additional study, our 211 study, and that enrolled both ambulant and non-ambulant patients. So those are patients who were older than in our previous trials and who were non-ambulant already at the time of enrollment in the study. So we're looking forward to seeing those results in the next while, and I think that will help us hone in a little bit more to answer that specific question. I think it's always important for the patient or caregiver to discuss the information with their healthcare professional to get a more definitive answer regarding their specific health needs. And with regards to the second part, there are a few patients receiving VILTEPSO who are in wheelchairs. So that does answer that half of the question.
Thanks so much. We have a more sciencey question here in terms of, can you speak to the difference in the amount of exon skipping seen versus the increase in dystrophin?
Dr. Magnus, do you want to take that? Or?
Sure. So as Dr. Thangarajh mentioned earlier, there are different parameters that we look at as, quote, biomarkers. So not functional or clinical data, but rather biomarkers of how a product is working. With regards to exon skipping, the most critical biomarker is how much dystrophin do you produce? And that is what we showed as our primary endpoint. And that was the 6% roughly that we saw in the patients on 80 milligrams that we showed in our slides a little bit earlier today. With regards to exon skipping, that's another measurement of a biomarker parameter. So it's how much of the messenger RNA now is without exon 53, because that is the target exon that we are trying to skip. And so those amounts can vary. Ours also showed statistical significance versus the baseline level of these patients, because clearly these patients at baseline were not skipping exon 53. They all had exon 53 in their genome. So we did show exon skipping, and the exact correlation between exon skipping and dystrophin production, I don't think has been established just yet. Dystrophin production is the method that the FDA has said is the biomarker that we use for approving these medications.
Thanks. You know, the way I'll often think of it too, right? There's multiple steps in the process. And I think you very well described, right? Like in the end, what we've talked to the FDA about, right, is the amount of dystrophin, which is important. But the number in terms of skipping, right, is telling you your drug is getting to the right place. It's doing what it's supposed to be doing and setting you on that path to be developing dystrophin. And it has to do all with, you know, a lot of factors in the cells in terms of how efficient or how long those important intermediary steps, you know, those factors are around for.
Right. I think exon skipping can be viewed as downstream from the final production of dystrophin, which is the ultimate goal.
That's great. There's a question here too, in terms of, I think you mentioned it at the top of the webinar, Gardner, about whether you're expanding to other mutations. So maybe you can just run through that again for people who might have missed it.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to. So we have a approved product, completed phase 3, VILTEPSO. It's for exon 53 mutation. We have programs, well, we licensed a product from Capricor that's currently enrolling phase 3, and that will be across all mutations. Additionally, we have programs in exon 44, exon 50, exon 51, exon 45, and exon 55 so far that we've disclosed publicly, and it's on our website.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Gardner,
Mike-
well, I just have a follow-up question. So for each of those specific mutations, will NS Pharma be going through kind of a multi-year study and an extension study like they did with VILTEPSO? Will it look the same?
Yeah, so I mean, the FDA really advises us on the correct pathway for each one of those programs. So there might be tweaks individually, and I'm not privy to those. I know that we are investing on these to bring them forward, and right now everything's a go, and we put them on our website, and we're fully funding them. Your question is sort of, will they be allowed to go through the accelerated pathway as many of these products have? That's an FDA and a regulatory negotiation. It seems very plausible. I just can't make any more firm comment than that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm seeing another question coming in. If you know, in Duchenne, we have individuals who are on steroids, and you know, we often talk at CureDuchenne that we might need to tackle the disease from multiple aspects, and individuals might be on multiple types of drugs. But this question here is specifically about the possibility of combining exon skipping with gene therapy. And, you know, I'd like to pose that question to the group.
I think that's an excellent question, and I think it's purely speculative at this point, because in terms of known data, patients who enrolled in the gene therapy study were excluded from being on exon skipping or other investigative products at that point. And then vice versa, for those patients who enrolled in the exon skipping studies, those patients were excluded from having been on or having received gene therapy. So in terms of hard data, it's really difficult to know at this point, but I think we will start seeing clinical data appearing as people start employing polypharmacy, if you will, multiple modalities, as you said. So I think the jury is still out, but I think it's an important question to keep following.
So, and I actually have additional, from a strategic standpoint, or from a patient's perspective, gene therapy is very much in the beginning of treatment. There's going to be multiple options as the market matures, all offering different benefits and durability and whatnot. From a Duchenne care perspective, we're very much focused on the functionality now with the therapies that are available today. So just wanted to add that point.
Yeah, can I add a little comment in on it as well,
Yeah.
Ian? Yeah, I'll just back up a little bit and say, you know, we always believe that some of the best treatment options for the disease are going to be combination therapies. And by that, we mean ways to restore dystrophin. And there's a couple of ways that we can do that. But the combinations that we often think about that are going to be important is combining that, for example, with the Capricor product, or combining that with an anti-inflammatory agent, or combining that with a bone-sparing agent, or combining that with something that tackles fibrosis, because they're all important pathways. And I think the question's a really relevant one, but it's much too early to really understand the long-term consequences of combining two genetic therapies that are looking at trying to impact putting dystrophin back in. So I think this is something that we'll continue to ask and look and ways to define as we follow patients for many years, but it's too early to look at that. But combination therapies, I want to make clear to the audience, with all of the other modalities that I talk about, are going to be important ways that we treat this disease.
Absolutely. But I do think that in addition to all of that, that we have seen in like the SMA field, for example, individuals who have received multiple genetic targeting therapies, right? Gene therapy together with ASOs. And so we might start seeing that over time. We're at the first stages here, but we might start seeing that over time clinically as well.
Yeah. I think this is going to become a question that's going to be asked more and more as the first gene therapy products are approved, and we really understand them then over the longitudinally following the patients.
Absolutely. Were there other questions you had, Mike?
Yeah, there's a couple actually. Firstly, I think this is great data, you know, and I truly congratulate the NS Pharma team. You know, the original 24-week data expanded out to 24 months. And still maintaining that level of efficacy as well as the safety profile, you know, really needs to be applauded. I think the team have done a great job. And the levels of dystrophin that we're seeing here, you know, are significant. And so I've got a couple of questions around that. One is, over the open label extension during the 4-year study, did you allow for the different doses to be adjusted for steroid in some of these patients? Because we don't always keep them the same. I just wondering, was there any dose adjustments that were needed in there?
Dosage adjustment was done based on as the patient gained more weight, they would naturally tend to have higher doses of steroids used. So they were supposed to maintain kind of a stable dose of steroids for what their baseline values were.
Thanks, Leslie. And one other one that was in my mind was, is there plans to look at a biopsy at some time point to look at dystrophin levels after long-term chronic administration?
At this point, no. They were not done at the end of the 4-year study. And although we're still following many of these patients, I don't think the plan is to do another dystrophin biopsy at this time point.
Okay, thank you for that.
We have a couple more questions coming in terms of sort of logistics about, you know, who can VILTEPSO be used for? So maybe we can go over sort of the age ranges. Again, can it be used in individuals as young as 3 years old? You talked, Leslie, a little bit about older individuals. And who do we get in contact with someone to ask if we have questions that we want to find out a little bit more before talking with our doctor?
Yeah, so you can put up Jonathan's slide again, and in that top right is the contact number to start the process, 1-800, the support number. And then Leslie, will you answer the question on the indication? I believe it's not agent.
Sure. Yeah, it kind of covers off a few questions that have come in. The label does not specify anything about ages, so it is not restricted in our package insert. It's indicated for patients with DMD who are exon 53 skip amenable. Patients in our clinical trials were not younger than 4. We did enroll 2 patients who were 4, so we did have patients at that minimum age bracket. But then we also know from our patients who are taking the medication in the US, we do have some patients who have started it below the age of 4. So we already do, outside of the clinical trials program, have some patients who are younger than 4 who are receiving this medication already.
Thank you. And so the number to reach for Jonathan is this 833-677-8778. That's the number for any other questions.
Yeah, for NS support, and certainly you can always email me directly and I can triage it if it's a question that's not appropriate for NS support, but certainly welcome all inquiries.
Jonathan, you're brave for putting your cell phone number up on the slide.
Well, you know, be careful what you ask for, right, Carrie? And be careful.
That's right. But also I want to, be assured the people on the webinar, if you reach out to CureDuchenne and there's kind of, Jonathan and I talk a lot. So you're always going to receive support, whether it's kind of on the support side of or clinical side. We're able to lob those questions to the correct people. So you're getting an answer from someone.
And just a bit to add to Dr. Magnus's comment, whether your child is on the very young spectrum of age or much older. I believe our oldest patient on product is 30 years of age right now. I think the insurance companies are to be applauded for supporting the overwhelming majority, well into the 90-95% of all enrollments, prescriptions, for lay people get on product. So that's an extremely high level. And so we don't see any differentiation between the young and the old, the ambulatory and non-ambulatory, maybe just a little bit, but very successful.
Thank you for that. And just to clarify, this is all, Jonathan, you're the U.S. head of patient services. What can we say to individuals who might want to access this outside of the U.S.?
So go ahead, Governor.
So I'm happy to take that. I mean, so we have an access program ex-US for VILTEPSO. It's on our website, and I will also send an email to CureDuchenne to provide that program's contact information. It's outside the realm of our responsibility, but there is a program ex-US.
Thank you. So that's all I had. Any other questions from the rest of the CureDuchenne team?
None from me. I'm good.
Yeah. Any other? So last call for questions here. We still have a few people on. If you wanted to answer a question, we just have a few more minutes here. All right, no more questions. Dr. Thangarajh, any final notes that you want to impart on our webinar attendees?
No, I mean, if no one has questions, I mean, I haven't put up my cell phone, but my email is available. If someone wants to come to see us, we will make sure we'll be more than happy to take care of you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And I'll kind of
so Carrie, I just want to say thank you to CureDuchenne and the incredible resource that CureDuchenne is. I mean, this is a complex, very devastating, debilitating disease. We are focused every day trying to bring more therapies and more choices to help these boys live a healthier and healthier life. And CureDuchenne is right aligned with those goals. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the whole team, Dr. Thangarajh, for being here. And up here, cares@cureduchenne.org is where you're going to reach out to us. As Gardner said, all sorts of types of resources. So you can reach out. We'll put you in touch with the right people or hopefully provide some help ourselves. But thanks to everybody for attending today. This was a great webinar, great questions, and we'll see you again soon.